The global race for critical minerals must prioritize environmental, social, and governance concerns. Kazakhstan's unique approach to ESG involves separate frameworks for environmental protection, social responsibility, and corporate governance. While mining projects can bring positive impacts like infrastructure development and social investment, they can also lead to environmental damage and poor labor practices. Transitioning corporate governance from mere compliance to a culture of transparency, ethical and sustainable management can bring significant benefits to mining companies, including social acceptance, a stronger license to operate, higher returns on assets, and lower costs of finance. A panel of experts from the UK and Kazakhstan's financial and mining industries will share their expertise on the impact of regulatory changes on corporate governance in Kazakhstan's mining sector and emerging markets. The discussions will help clarify the challenges and opportunities in improving governance and ESG practices in the extractive sector, emphasizing the need for continuous dialogue and collaboration among stakeholders to ensure sustainable and responsible mining practices.
Thank you so much for coming, and let me first introduce my panel. We have Alexandra Keepin, who works for the Simmons Simmons, who are kindly hosting us. We have Aray Sitova, hopefully somewhere online. She is in charge of listing on Astana International Exchange. We have Roger Barker, who is working with the Institute of Directors and in charge of policies. And we have Eric Rasmussen, who has very big experience working with both EBRD, and now his main experience is working with various mining companies. So hopefully we have a very diverse panel who will help us to guide us through to answer the question what good governance looks like. So I think everyone liked in the previous session how Artem said that if you have a good project, it will get financed. So you have a good project, you have your strong management team, and you want to get listed somewhere in the world. So you look around and you see London Stock Exchange, New York, you see Toronto for the major mining markets, and you set on London, for example. And then you look at some smaller exchanges, and you work in Kazakhstan, so there is KC and there is AX. So you decide that AX makes a lot of sense because it's very much alike to London Stock Exchange, but at the same time opens your gateway to Asian markets. So let's start with Alexander. He'll talk to us about London Stock Exchange and how the exchange is making sure that companies actually keep coming to London.
So there's been a lot said about the listing rules in London over the recent years. The FCA has been going through a process of updating the listing rules, and this is part of a sort of overall regulatory reform to try and make the London Stock Exchange more competitive globally. So the first set of changes came into force in July this year, which was a change to the listing reforms, which looked at the listing categories in London, replacing the main market premium listing with a new category called commercial companies category, and sort of reintroducing a international secondary listing category for companies who are listed overseas and want to also have a listing in London, but perhaps in a sort of more regulatory light way. And we have a note on all of these if anyone wants further reading afterwards. But the categories have been sort of shaken up. You have commercial categories, which is the main category now that replaced premium listing, and it's that one that is effectively index included. So companies who want to be in the sort of UK FTSE series will list on the commercial companies category. The international commercial companies category is, as I say, an additional one. If you have a listing elsewhere, you're not listed in, you're not incorporated in London, then you can access the London Stock Exchange through that sort of secondary listing. Companies like Wheaton Precious Metals, example of a company that has that sort of secondary listing in London, where they've added a London listing alongside their New York and Toronto listings. which then means that the investors who have a remit to invest in London companies can also invest in them. And then there's a few other sort of categories that are listed on the screen for sort of more specialist areas. But for commercial companies, which is the sort of the main area, the key takeaway is that actually more companies will be eligible to list in London post the reform than were before. So for many companies, you had to have a 3-year track record, control 75% of your business in order to list, whereas now you have to provide whatever track record you have, but there's no mandated track record. So if you're a fast-growing company, you can access the London Stock Exchange. Before, as well, you had to have a 12-month clean working capital statement to list in London. That's also been removed. So if you haven't got enough working capital for 12 months because you're a high growth company, or for example, you're a mining company developing a big mine and you don't have your project finance in place, then you can still list in London. And similarly, they've removed the restriction on having to control your business, which means that sort of like franchise companies and also sort of royalties and streamer companies can list in this main category and therefore get index inclusion. There are a number of provisions which sort of remain in force. If you want to list in London, you've got to have preemption rights in place. You've got to have a provision that independent directors can be voted on outside of a controlling shareholder. So that's a shareholder who owns 30%. And you have to still have a 10% free float. And sort of where the rules have relaxed a lot of things, effectively saying, disclose to buyers of your shares what the risks are, explain the situation, and they can make their own decision. The flip side to that is that actually the board members now have to take a bit more responsibility and have to give a confirmation on IPO. For those that are interested on controlling shareholders, effectively, there used to be a requirement that you had a relationship agreement with your controlling shareholder. That requirement has now gone. You have to have sort of some constitutional provisions regarding independent directors, but you don't have to have a relationship agreement. We'll see how that works out in practice, because on the AIM market, for example, you never had to have a relationship agreement, but it was market practice, and investors were keen to see that. So we'll see whether that change actually takes place, but it's no longer mandated. The other sort of side, obviously, from listing is what's life going to be like when you are a listed company. And again, I think the key takeaway on the continuing obligations is that actually it's a less onerous regime now. There's streamlined provisions regarding significant transactions and also related party transactions. So you still have some investor sort of protections that are still there. If you want to issue shares at more than a 10% discount, you need shareholder approval. If you're making an acquisition that's bigger than you, or if you're changing your business, then you still need to get shareholder approval for that. But and you still have the same annual reporting requirements, particularly around TCFD, diversity, and UK corporate governance as a whole. But the sort of the main criticisms that London listed companies were at a disadvantage, because if they were making an acquisition that was 25% of their size or bigger, they had to go and get shareholder approval, which added risk and it added some delay and uncertainty as to whether the transaction would complete. Whereas on a number of other exchanges, there weren't that requirement. That's gone now. So where you do have those sorts of transactions, you don't need shareholder approval. You just have to make an announcement. If a transaction is 25% or more than your size, then the contents of that announcement are prescriptive, set out exactly what it is. But below that threshold, you just need to give investors enough information to understand the acquisition or transaction you're entering into. There's been a relaxation of some of the rules as well around discussions with shareholders, because by removing the requirement for shareholder approval, there's a recognition that you then need to engage with shareholders to make sure they're supportive of the transaction. So as a result of this, we have a situation now where less transactions will be significant transactions, either because they're ordinary course or because the tests have been reduced. And you don't need the shareholder approval. And the story is sort of quite similar in terms of related party transactions. Fewer transactions will now be related party transactions because a related party is now only a shareholder who owns 20% or more rather than 10% or more. There are relaxation around what is an ordinary course transaction. There was always criticism in London that if you were an airline, for example, buying and selling aircraft and airline engines were treated as abnormal transactions, whereas now it's a recognition that those form part of the sort of the ordinary course. Where you do have a related party transaction, again, you don't need shareholder approval, so you don't have that additional sort of delay and uncertainty, but you have to put out an announcement and you have to appoint a sponsor, so an independent sort of financial advisor who will confirm whether or not they think it's fair and reasonable for the shareholders as a whole. Just a quick word on international secondary listing category. Effectively, if you're non-UK incorporated and your shares are admitted to an overseas exchange, which is a signatory to the IOSCO Multilateral Memorandum of Understanding, then you can access London in a London-light way. The London-light way effectively doesn't impose a lot of the continuing obligations that you would have as a commercial company on you. So it relies instead on the protections that you have on your sort of home exchange. And so you can access London with much lighter sort of regulatory regime, but still get access to those investors. Then the final word I was going to say was just on indexation. You've got to be in the commercial categories company if you want to be included in the UK indices. And AIM is spoken about quite a bit because we don't yet have sort of AIM's response to all of these listing rule reforms. I think they are considering where that leaves the AIM market, in that some of the distinctions have been eroded, but there are still a number of distinctions between the two markets. And as I say, the listing rule reforms is just the sort of the first part in the regulatory reform. We expect the AIM market to be updated, and then the prospectus rules are also currently under consultation with new rules that are going to be more permissive for companies to raise money, particularly from existing shareholders, are expected to come into force middle of next year. To you, Tim.
Thank you, Alexander. Hopefully we have Arai fine there.
Hello, yes, I'm here myself.
Okay, so we have Arai, who is in charge of Astana International Exchange, which was set up several years ago in Kazakhstan in Astana Financial Center. So she will tell us a few words about how Astana Exchange works and how it has been development in the past several years.
Good day, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to join you today. So let me brief you about Astana International Exchange itself. It operates within the unique economic and legal zone in Kazakhstan, which is named Astana International Financial Center, AFC. It's designed to attract international investors and develop countries' financial sector. Just a few words about AFC itself. It was established in 2017 and operates under independent legal framework based on English common law principles, and having its independent court system and arbitration system, which consists of international judges with extensive experience in international law. In terms of setup of IX, I would like to emphasize that IX is a core pillar of the AFC project as a whole, and it's designed to connect Kazakhstan with the global capital markets. And also it was founded in 2017. The initiative of foundation was part of the broader strategy to position Kazakhstan as a financial, regional financial hub, providing a gateway for investors and issuers in the region. AX actually offers distinct advantages, and I would like to name the major one. As I mentioned before, of course, it's legal framework based on English law principles, English common law principles, and the independent court system. The second, I would like to mention that among shareholders of IX, there are globally recognized financial institutions, institutions such as Shanghai Stock Exchange and NASDAQ. IX also has separate settlement and clearing depository and IX registrar, which are both AX subsidiaries, and they are powered by Avenir Technologies, which are well-established provider of post-trade infrastructure. And also, I would like to mention that AX, nonetheless, that it's very young exchange. It's already a member of World Federation Exchanges, Federation of Eurasian Stock Exchanges, and our financial regulator is a member of IOSCO. I think this is quite enough for you to have a picture about benefits IX provides for, and thus let me move to the growth of IX. Actually, I understand that the numbers are quite difficult for perception, so I would just say that this year IX is experiencing an exponential growth because our trading turnover hit $1 billion for this year, doubling overall trading volume since it launched in 2017. So it took us 5 years to reach the first $1 billion milestone, and only 10 years, less than 10 months, to achieve the second milestone. This was achieved by the participation of the local investors and international investors, as well as increase of the listings and listed securities on IX. Also, the growth is supported by participation of the IX trading members, which are, we have, as of today, 50 trading members, and half of them are international brokers. This milestone reflects the growing role of IX as a regional leader in the capital market. Talking about challenges IX faces, I would like to say that we face them as any evolving institution, and one key challenge is raising awareness among local local participants. We are offering them kind of to consider exchange as alternative to conventional banking lending platform. So we convince them to raise capital via our exchange, and this requires not only education but also building trust in exchange's ability to provide reliable and efficient capital raising opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Arai. Now let's move to Roger. He is a big part of Institute of Directors, and as we heard before from the stock exchange and from RI, what the exchange is looking for is strong governance, and obviously having a strong board with independent directors is part of the journey. So can you please tell us a bit about the Institute of Directors and how it drives good governance in companies?
Yes, certainly. And thank you so much. Thank you so much, Tanya. Yeah, I'd be very glad to do that. I mean, the Institute of Directors has been around for a long time. It's actually the UK's oldest organisation for business leaders. We were formed in 1903. We have a royal charter. We have 20,000 individual members. We're very much involved in training directors, particularly through our chartered director professional qualification. And over the years, we've done that internationally a great deal, including in Central Asia. We trained a lot of directors in the Russian Federation until a few years ago, but that's obviously stopped for obvious reasons. But it's still going on in Kazakhstan, for example, where we partner up with Samro Kazna to do that. I think, you know, the role of director is absolutely central to all of this. I mean, Are was talking about how do you win trust in a company? How do you persuade shareholders to invest in you, stakeholders to partner with you and to accept you? Well, that's why you need a governance framework to do that. And the legal structure is part of the picture. Other actors like auditors and investors also play their role in good governance. But right at the centre of delivering good governance is the board of directors, and that's true in any organisation. And the ability of, in particular, independent directors, you know, to provide that check and balance on and that oversight of what the management are doing, you know, to ask the right questions, to hold a strong moral compass in terms of what the company is doing. To develop the right sort of relationships and engagement with other stakeholders. That, I think, is crucial, especially in a sector like mining, because, you know, mining impacts on so much of society. It can be a huge asset to a society, or it can be disastrous at the other extreme. So the thing which really makes sure that it heads in the right direction is good governance and good directors. And so, well, the IOD is very committed to continuing to train directors in mining companies and in this part of the world, in the Central Asian part of the world, because it will be crucial.
Thank you so much. Eric, you come from you come in different shapes and forms. So first you worked in EBRD and you saw the companies, you were looking for this good governance. Then you, at the same time, you sat on the boards representing EBRD, making sure the companies are doing the right thing. And then you started working on the other end, being non-executive director, bringing good governance. Can you talk to us a bit about your experience and how this shift works and how actually being a director is making the change in the company?
Yeah, well, thank you. So today I'm in the shape of a human being, Homo sapiens, and on the board of a company, actually two. One of them you probably know well, which is Adriatic Metals, with a mine in Bosnia. Bosnia has a complicated state governance system, probably one of the more complicated you can find. That said, we have a very successful transaction, despite the occasional problems you will find in a mining company that is challenging the board to think out of the box and overcome. And this is possible only because we, as you said, have well-trained board directors, and we get them from a mix of skills and expertise coming together. So when I joined this company on the board, it seemed like a very easy sort of mission because really good reports, excellent transparency. But I spoke to the board chairman and he asked me, if you suddenly are being called up and you have to go to a board meeting, what will you first think about? And honestly, I had no idea how to answer. But luckily, in my good old team in EBRD, we learned a little memory word called board rats. board means board structure, R for regulatory compliance, A for accountability, T for transparency, and S for stakeholder engagement and outreach. So the stakeholders is not only the owners, of course, it's the employees, it's also the owners, and not to forget the communities, creditors and others. And the communities was probably what sort of rang a bell with me when I got the question. So, well, the first thought I would have would probably be about the communities, because if we don't have a good social contract, a psychological contract with our communities, we probably will have the worst of all problems. And the second thing that will be in my mind will be the government, because mining is important to remember is an infrastructure concession business. I think it's a lot better term for mining than the word mining. We only operate under a concession with the government. And when that relationship and that concession is in trouble, everything you invested is in trouble, including communities and every other stakeholder. So the sort of board rats, which is my memory word for quickly doing a mental check on what I need to look at when I walk into the boardroom, has actually helped me many times. Because reality is, like when you are suddenly at home and your kids are coming earlier than they should, and your wife is not there, and you have to both cook and clean, take care of the neighbors, catch the dog, and find out where the cat ran away. That's a bit how you often feel like walking into a boardroom when there's real change going on. Because suddenly all the standards and procedures and reports are not telling you what to think and telling you what to do. And suddenly you have to act like a real human being and find a group dynamic together with the other people on the board. Because this is a social reality to be on a board. You develop a group together. And amazingly, when you actually start to get to know each other and work well together, you'll be twice as effective as we ever thought you would be able to. I have another little memory I will share with you from practicality. What is it that you often look for which is not served in the board memo and the board agenda and so on? Because these documents are important and obviously has to be processed. But the discussion in many cases also don't leave a lot of time for you to sort of get your thoughts out and get your head around complex problems. And I think there are two aspects when it comes to both the relationship with government and typically the partner you also have in the company. In some places, we are only one set of sort of shareholders, but in many companies, obviously, we are joint ventures and alliances. And these are the two key things to always keep on top of your mind. Apart from safety, it always comes first, and employees and creditors getting their money. It is the government and the alliances. Keep those close to the forehead. And there are, for me, two things I look for as a little hint between what is written down. And it comes down to sort of greed and fear. If you, in your partnership, are in the conversations with your partner, whether it's the government or your alliance partner, are getting a sense of, in the conversation, of a great apprehension in the counterparty and a situation that can lead to a great loss. When you have these two things together, the potential great loss can be looming, a lot of apprehension with the counterparty you talk to, then the label on this is fear. And this is very important because when fear is very high, two things tend to happen. Either you're in a situation where the very fearful person actually don't have a lot of interest in driving the company anymore on the board. And in this case, you actually have a fairly good partner. You need to just re-inject motivation and sharing of benefits, typically with government. But if you have a lot of fear and you also have a lot of sort of temptation for gain, maybe a big bounty to get, then you will see opportunistic behavior. You will see greed. When greed or fear is mixed in the cocktail with your counterparty, then you have a real problem. That's what I'm looking at. I know it sounds very strange because it's not mechanical, but greed and fear mixed together is where the biggest problems appear. And when you have, for instance, a government that has changed, and you may have individuals who see opportunistic gain. At the same time, they have an element of fear. They don't know how long they're going to sit in their job. They may change again. That is a situation where we often have very difficult problems at the board to deal with, because these problems obviously cannot be dealt with in procedures and process and people only. But you need to find ways of getting intelligence about the problem from government individuals, from friends and alliance partners out in the operating environment, in order to monitor, understand, and inject solutions to the problem. My experience has been that when greed and fear is coming out of, for instance, conversation with government officials, also alliance partners, these are very difficult problems, and they often take a lot of time, and you need to be good at what I would call difficult conversations. There are a lot of good books written about difficult conversations, and you can get good training about it as well. So, and this is an important skill to have. When you're at the board and you walk into that room and you meet namely that problem that has to do with greed and fear from government people or alliance partners, arm yourself with patience, thick skin, and being an expert in difficult conversations, because you will need them a lot. The last little point I will say is that when you have difficult conversations, there's this one moment that is very important. Sometimes it happens quickly, sometimes it takes a lot of conversations. But it is when we, together with the other counterparty, start to acknowledge together that we have a problem. It sounds obvious, but it's not. When you have that conversation, the government person at one point, because you're not going to give up. If you give up, you're finished. But when you have that conversation, you reach a level where we start to agree we have a problem, both of us. That's where the turning point happens, because the next question then is to the government person or the alliance partner, what do you suggest we do about it? And if it's anything with brown envelopes, obviously that's not part of the training, and it's not legal either. But when it comes to how we can share benefits differently, how we can accommodate the neighboring, typically canton, for instance, hiring more of their people to show that we care about the neighboring municipality as well, there's a host of things one can do. And then remember, when you have a really good problem, then you have an excellent solution, then you just need to do one more thing. Give the government people all the credit for the solution.
Thank you, Eric. Let's get back to Roger, because we talked a lot about how you train a good director. How do you help develop this? What comes down to moral compass? It doesn't come from the policies. You need to help them understand where things are coming from and going to.
Well, I think what you described, Eric, is the essence of being a director, which is that it requires a lot of skill. There are all sorts of trade-offs. There are dilemmas. There are human interactions. It isn't just straightforward focusing on one objective. Various things need to be balanced against each other, and that requires skill. That requires experience and expertise. And of course, historically, a lot of directors have developed that skill through their own careers. Most of them have come up an executive route. They then have to, of course, make the transition to being on a board, because being on a board, it's not just about one functional area. You have to understand everything which is going on in it. You have to have that broad, holistic perspective. So that's quite a big jump, from being an executive to being a director. And also, some people, we are encouraging this nowadays. We want people to come into directorship from a broader range of backgrounds than perhaps they have historically, and not just take the usual suspects route. I've been an executive, then I sort of slipped seamlessly from being CEO to being a non-executive director. There are other useful backgrounds to being a director, and again, I think director training can provide that. But also, I think having a qualification like the Chartered Director qualification, it provides a level of assurance around a director, and a knowledge that you know, the people here on the board, they're on the same page here because they have a common understanding of what it means to be a director. And being a director, you know, the sort of directors we want in these companies are independent spirits, you know, people who are critical, who are questioning, who are really willing to get to the bottom of red flags. You know, what is really going on in this organization? That's the sort of director we want. And perhaps some people in a certain background aren't used to that kind of questioning, critical approach. And it does, of course, vary by culture as well. But that ultimately is what we need. And that's what we try to inculcate with people who become chartered directors.
Thank you. All right. Astana Stock Exchange is a young and developing stock exchange. It took all the best from London, but obviously from the point it got incorporated, it's moving in its own way. What Astana is looking for as good governance for the companies they listed and would like to get listed?
Thanks, Tanya. Indeed, AFC provides for high corporate governance standards. Actually, they are consistent with those found in the most developed financial markets worldwide, including London Stock Exchange as well. These principles are mainly aimed to support investor confidence, promote market stability, and safeguard the interest of stakeholders. But considering the time constraint of our panel, I would like to focus on how the AX implements corporate governance principles tailored to issuers' needs. Since all of you understand that Kazakhstan is emerging and developing market, and we understand that at this stage of development, flexibility is essential for fostering growth while upholding the very high corporate governance standards. So at AX, we try to balance the promotion of high corporate governance principles and with the flexibility required to our issuers from our side. So I will just highlight the main, like the key ways this flexibility is implemented in AX. First of all, as Alexander told in his part, we have kind of light approach for the issuers coming from equivalent stock exchanges. It's exchanges which are approved by our financial regulator as equivalent. So these issuers that are accessing multiple markets, they can like enjoy their listing on IX without the burden of duplicating regulatory requirements. So we do not require any excessive corporate governance principle they should to comply with. In this case, we just rely on the primary stock exchange. The second approach from the flexibility we apply to the issuers depending on the legal form. For example, the majority of debt issuers on IX are Kazakhstan companies which are incorporated in the form of the limited liability partnership. It's kind of analogous to private companies. So for such companies, we do not require to establish board of directors because on legislation basis under Kazakhstan jurisdiction, they are not required to have board of directors. So in this case, we require to establish a supervisory body, which is analogous to BOD, and rather than requiring them to transfer to the public companies, I mean, to change their legal form from private company to public company. At IX, we respect the distinction and do not require, again, I repeat, to change their legal form. And the same approach is, for example, for special purposes vehicle companies. It's another type of popular issuers of structured products on IX. We understand the nature of such entities, which are like created for specific and limited purposes, having a narrow scope of operations, and which do not involve broad shareholder participation or complex governance needs. And another approach we apply is flexible approach based on instrument type. To the issuers of equity securities, we expect adherence to the highest standards of corporate governance to ensure the maximum transparency, accountability, and stakeholder confidence. On the other hand, for the debt instruments, we require limited corporate governance principles, depending, specifically, we require to have a board of directors. This board of directors should be well experienced, qualified, and the board of directors shall ensure accuracy and transparency of financial reports, and establishment of effective risk management and internal controls within the company. Another approach which we use during our onboarding process is that we do not conduct a very detailed analysis of the corporate governance principles the company comply with. We just require self-certification from the issuers, where the issuers complete the relevant checklist, marking yes or no for the required principle, and supporting with referencing supporting documents like articles of association, shareholder agreement, and internal policies. And in terms of monitoring, we also apply some flexibility, monitoring with compliance with corporate governance principles, I mean. Here we apply approach, so-called guide to grow. So instead of punishment, we rather focusing on education of our issuers. For example, we hold webinars to educate issuers on best practices, on practices which our legislation provides for. We issue, upon the submission of annual reports, we issue direction letters to the issuers, summarizing the main mistakes they made in their reports and providing deadlines for the rectification of such mistakes. So we allow issuers to make omissions and improve their reports over time without significant penalties. Our ultimate goal is to produce for issuers to produce better annual reports year after year, reflecting continuous improvement in government practices.
Thank you, Erai. Can we probably ask a similar question, Alexander? But obviously he cannot speak on behalf of the stock exchange, but probably he's the person, anyone who ever listed in London or did any corporate action worked with Alexander at some point. So he can probably knows very well what the stock exchange is thinking. So is there too much compliance? Is there too much governance? So for example, the most recent governance code, they first wanted to make a massive change, and then they only left some risks in, so they kept everything as it is. Are they tracking back? Are they thinking about having less compliance?
I think that sort of the proposed changes to the UK Corporate Governance Code came in at the same time as London was trying to make itself more attractive and going through all the listing reforms. And so the two things didn't sort of sit particularly well together. I mean, London has a pretty developed set of requirements for corporate governance. The scrutiny these days is much more on how companies are actually applying that in practice, rather than whether those are sufficient in themselves. So it's much more focusing on, is the annual report reporting just formulaic, or actually is it something that that Eric is saying, where effectively, the board is taking responsibility for this. We all help companies as they list come up with probably 15 or 20 different corporate governance policies covering each aspect of their business. But does that go into a drawer, just sort of ticking boxes, or is it actually something that is in the sort of the very nature of the company, and that the board instills on a sort of top-down basis? So, I mean, I don't think that London is sort of too light. I don't think there needs to be massive reform. It's actually more focused around how it actually applied.
If I may comment there, we talk about process, procedure, and people. I think the stock exchanges and many of the ministries are very good at process and procedures. They are Olympic masters in that. But it comes down to people in the end. That third leg is hugely important, because the procedures and the process obviously is not worth much without the real people. So the guardrails, I think, are well defined. There's no doubt that they're loosened a little bit in order to make London Stock Exchange competitive compared to other places that mining companies would list. And some of the other places are much looser. So it's a bit of a balance of how much you can get, and also, to be fair, it's a business to be in a stock exchange. But back to the people, because that's really what matters. I have been on numerous boards in my career, and I can tell you from an experience, I was in a brewery company at one point. It's not the same as mining, I know, but it's still a board of directors. And I am absolutely truthful when I say that out of the 7 first board meetings I had, in 5 of them, half the board was literally asleep. I mean, you could hear them sleeping. And at the moment they woke up, it was when we had to talk about the board's enumeration. So this actually happened. And this is because the procedures and the process were actually very good. I mean, there may be one procedure missing. That was the ticking whether people were, awake. But apart from that, it was a really sleepy board that just produced some beer and, sold it and didn't really think much more about it. And there was no ambition. And of course, it didn't take long before someone out there in the real world saw that there was a sleepy board and it was undervalued in terms of company. And soon after, we were taken over by a big Danish brewery company, guess which one, with probably the best beer in the world. The new team arrived in the boardroom. I was there. I was Danish. They didn't know, so they spoke a lot in Danish and talked about these sleepy board members they've heard a lot about, including him. They pointed at me. He must be the sleepiest of them all. And, there comes a moment like when you're visiting your mother-in-law where you have to admit you understand the language. And I did that. I just said hello in Danish, and somehow that changed the tone. But it comes down to people is really important. And I know it's an age-old saying, but it's important that people don't have too many board seats. I think there's still too many board members out there who are cutting their coupon, a nice little income, and then they follow religiously the papers they're being sent. They don't ask many questions in addition to that. And they certainly don't do much in terms of building the informal relationships to employees, contractors, and others. Is that something you should do as a board member? Should you not rely on what management is telling you? Who would not rely only on what management is telling you? If you have life in your arm, raise it. Okay, half. Yeah, because it is clear if management has a problem, it's a bit like going home to your mother. You're not going to tell her about it. And you're not going to tell the board about you have a problem. You would like to try and solve it before you tell the board. And that's very human. And I know it's a bit simplistic, but it's very human. Just look at all the big scandals we have in the corporate world. It mostly starts with the CEO or CFO having a problem, seeing a problem, first wanting to solve it, don't want to look incompetent, don't want to raise a risk that they should have seen and reported earlier. So it becomes a bit this sort of, I will try to solve this before I inform the board. If the board does not have these informal connections to suppliers, bankers, employees, government officials, you often will not have an early warning. Now, once management gets used to that, and in a modern management, in a regulated stock exchange, it's not a problem, of course, because you are per code pushed to develop as a board member these informal relationships. But if you don't have it, you won't have the early warning. And once it is accepted that you need these relationships, management actually work with you to help establish it. They don't try to filter information for you. And the discussions and the problem-solving capacity, that's an important word. Problem-solving capacity is actually more than one word. It's an important concept because this makes the difference between a successful company and one that is slipping in the banana skin. Problem-solving capacity is hugely important for a board. It only comes by making sure the board has a variety of different people, but also channels of information, and not only through management. And that, I think, is the key thing to work on. It remains the biggest problem, in my humble opinion, from what I've seen in numerous boards. And it's probably an evergreen to work on.
Thank you so much. Let's get questions from the audience, because that's probably the main point of having the panel here. Can we have the microphones?
Let's go and get them.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to bring the conversation back to Eurasia and ask about the implications of your insights to companies in the countries in question. There's an inheritance of difficult governance in many countries of the region that have barely come to surface yet. It's not an easy investment climate. It's improving. What you're talking about actually, for the most part, is experience from very well-developed markets, well-developed investment climates for the most part. Many of the key mining companies in these countries are state-owned. These are going to be the partners of joint ventures and various collaborations. There is inherent risk. Things are changing, things are improving. What advice can you provide to tackle some of these inherent deep governance problems in the sector to avoid a bit of a starry-eyed rush to what seem to be very good investment opportunities, which carry significant governance risks?
If I may start out making a comment, and it's a good point you're raising, because we have many state-owned companies who would like to tap the stock exchanges for some money, maybe sell 10-15% of the stake to raise cash, some of it in dividend to government, some of it to be invested in the company. In order to get there, they will go out and find very friendly board directors. And it's great because they often pay very well. But you are sort of asked not to ask too much, I would say. And this is where it's important, I think, all from the stock exchange and the training agencies to try and get a foot in the door so that the selection of board members is actually people that are not just trying to think and talk like the government, because the governments actually need people to think differently. By the end of the day, if you have the bravery of the government to put some money on the shares on the stock exchange, take the full step and get some good directors in who do their homework, but also ask questions. It is clear, of course, for some of these state-owned enterprises, they have a very limited mandate in what they are allowed to do and how far transparency can go. That's understood. But there is a big room for improvement in these companies, huge, in fact. The inefficiency, many times the lack of controls, compliance, corruption, it's all available to those who want to work with it and improve on it. And it's actually possible. But you need the right type of directors. And I think that's where the two gentlemen here could do a lot more.
I was planning to ask Roger, you work a lot in Kazakhstan and there is a huge quasi-government sector. How do you help directors to navigate that?
Yeah, and just to provide a bit of historical perspective here, there was a previous period when London was very much into attracting natural resources companies from this part of the world, and it didn't end very well. I mean, one, you know, we use them as case studies now, the Institute of Directors, to be honest. One was ENRC, where actually the person who was the deputy chair of the Institute of Directors was one of the directors that was pushed off that board, actually. Another one was Boomi, of course, with Nat Rothschild, a real debacle there. SR Energy, that's a slightly different country, but all they all had in common, of course, was there were controlling shareholders who at first were very keen to list on the stock market, and then at a certain point realised this is not going quite as we wanted it to, and then started doing things really to the detriment of the minority shareholders. And of course, one of the reasons for having independent directors is to be the champion of the minority shareholders, as well as other stakeholders as well. And you know, you need to have directors sitting on the boards of these companies who have real credibility, real expertise, who demonstrate at every opportunity that they think independently, and if necessary, they're prepared to speak truth to power and potentially even resign. We have a code of conduct for directors, the Institute of Directors. We just recently launched it after having a long consultation process and a commission. You know, one of the key things in our code of conduct is if you can't resolve something, despite your best efforts at board level, you can't live with it, either because it's not good governance or it's just off your moral compass, then ultimately you have to step down. And that's, of course, when independent directors do step down, it has consequences for the company because the market thinks, what's going on here? So that's part of the check and balance. But yeah, directors are key, I think.
And I think sort of even with the changes to the listing rules where you've no longer got sort of the mandatory relationship agreement with a controlling shareholder, that principle that the independent directors are there to bring and help enforce sort of good governance is central. And so whilst you haven't got the contractual agreement, actually enshrined in the articles is protection where it requires a vote of independent shareholders as well as the controlling shareholder to try and make sure that the independent directors are there and able to do their job effectively.
Yes.
It's quite clear, of course, like in all relationships, that you try and set expectations from the outset. And I think there's a little bit of a miss because very good investment bankers come in and they help place these shares for the state-owned enterprise, but they may not spend so much time explaining in detail, you know, how do you actually get these directors on board that are different and a bit sort of unknown. Everything is unknown, has a risk to it, right? So how do you get them on board and get comfortable with them? And it is perfectly okay to have interviews with them, of course, and have a discussion about the problems that the company has and how this director or he, she, and them together will try and work on it. And there may be in that conversation certain parameters or problems that are not known yet, of course, will be known later in the course of directors working through agendas and do due diligence on the company. But these initial conversations, also interviews, are actually quite good because they can help set the psychological contract with the main shareholder about why these individuals are arriving. And they're not just to tick a box under some matrix made by an investment bank. In fact, I have seen, and I truly believe that good directors, independent directors on a board can do a massive benefit to a company, alone for the reason that management often feel that they need a partner in change. The management of a state-owned enterprise is often also sometimes under a lot of restriction and would like to see change. If they can get independent director on their side and understand the change they want to make, the enterprise reform makes sense, they actually have someone who can help them in dialogue with the main shareholder. So it's not just sort of often seen as a group of, excuse me, Western weirdos or widows coming on the board that we have to contain as much as possible to avoid anyone rocking the boat. It's a matter of actually working with them in order to have agents that help you in change. And when that happens, magic happens, because the government actually becomes more happy. They realize they make more money on the company and they have less fatalities, less safety incidents, and so on. Often it doesn't take a lot of imagination to sell good news when there are good results. What we don't want is to sell good news without good results. This used to be the Soviet way of doing things. You know, the harvest was always bigger than last year, no matter if there was a drought. So, you know, good news were important. The results we can talk about another day. So make results and sell them as good news. Then something magical happens in the head of people. Everyone starts to jump on the wagon, wants to be part of the success. So independent directors, in my humble opinion, are neither shackles around the legs nor barriers to actually operate. They're great agents of positive change. And that is what these initial conversations need to be all about.
I think this is a very good conclusion to this session, and unfortunately we ran out of time, but all of us will be like either here or having lunch, so please feel free to come and ask more questions. And thank you, Arai, for joining us from cold Astana. Thank you so much. Bye.